and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. My name is Bob Power, and on behalf of OTC Markets, as well as our co-hosts, Murdoch Capital and TAA Advisory, we're very pleased you've joined us for our next live presentation from Prosper Gold Corporation. Before I introduce our speaker, a few points to note. Please submit your questions in the question box to the bottom left of the slides. Once the Q&A session is ended, don't log out. You'll automatically be transferred into the Prosper Gold booth, where you can continue to ask questions via chat and access additional shareholder materials. On a final note, all of today's presentations will be recorded and available for 24/7 replay. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome Rory Ritchie, Vice President of Exploration of Prosper Gold, which trades on the OTCQX Best Market under the symbol PGXFF and on the TSXV under the symbol PGX. Welcome, Rory.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me today, and thanks for everyone for taking the time to listen to Prosper Gold's story. Prosper Gold is a mineral exploration company based in Vancouver, British Columbia, and we're currently targeting the next world-class gold discovery in Red Lake, Ontario, Canada. As Bob mentioned there, we are listed on the OTCQX, a relatively new listing. PGXFF is our symbol. I will be making some forward-looking statements over the course of this presentation, so please keep that in mind. Our team is led by Peter Bernier. Pete founded Richfield Ventures in 2007, and in 2009, along with Dirk Templeman-Cluett, a director and advisor to Prosper, they acquired the Blackwater-Davidson project in north-central British Columbia, which was ultimately sold to New Gold in a transaction valued at approximately $550 million. So in 2 short years, that team took the company's share price from 12 cents to over $10. Our COO, James Hedallen, he's been with Prosper since its inception in 2013. He handles all things corporate finance and corporate compliance related. Myself, as Bob mentioned, Vice President of Exploration. Having lived and worked in Red Lake in the past, I bring relevant experience to the table. Our board is rounded out by Jason Hines and Jim Miller-Tate. Jason is currently Vice President, Business Development and Strategy at Royal Gold. He's been there since 2013. And Jim Miller-Tate is currently Vice President of Exploration for Imperial Metals. 2 distinguished gentlemen make up our advisory board, Tom Obradovich and Doug Cater. Both have had tremendous success over the course of their careers. Most notably, Tom was a key individual behind Aurelian Resources, which discovered the Fruta del Norte deposit and was ultimately acquired by Kinross Gold Mines for $1.2 billion in 2008. And Douglas Cater most recently was Vice President of Exploration for Kirkland Lake Gold from 2016 to 2019. And over those 3 years, KL saw its share price go from $6 to over $60. Our cap structure as it stands, just over $7.5 million in the treasury, just under 21 million shares issued and outstanding, 11.7% management ownership, largely led by Peter Bernier, and 19% institutional ownership, split more or less evenly between Sprott Global, Plethora Precious Metals Fund, and Crescat Capital. So we feel very fortunate to have those groups as shareholders. Our flagship project, the Golden Sidewalk Project, 160 square kilometers in the Red Lake District. The Red Lake District is a fantastic mining jurisdiction. I've worked there for years myself. A very mining-friendly part of the world, and an area that's currently seeing a lot of investment, largely on the back of Great Bear Resources, Dixie Project gold discovery. Some other key players in the area, about 40 kilometers to our northeast, First Mining Gold has a roughly 5 million ounce resource there under development, and Pure Gold Mining has recently recommenced production at the Madsen Project just southwest of Red Lake. Looking at the northern 2/3 of the project now, so Prosper, it's a combination of properties we consolidated in mid of 2020. Most of the exploration historically has been focused around the Bathurst Mine in the northwestern portion of the project there, with good reason. The Bathurst Mine is a historical high-grade producer, and there's a lot of splashy gold numbers up in that part of the project. Perhaps historical operators had a tough time stringing together the necessary tonnages. But Prosper Gold had a different exploration concept in mind when we took on the project, largely predicated around being proximal to a regional unconformity shown in the dashed red line there. And we did some work in 2020, identified several significant regional targets, most notably the Golden Corridor, which is now a significant till anomaly with some very appealing geophysics and geological characteristics. Apart from that, the Skinner North we identified that has a lot of upside potential. We'll be developing drill targets further 2021 up there, and as well the E12 and Balmer till anomalies remain open for expansion. So we will be doing some work to move those things along as well. But really the focus at this point for the company is the Golden Corridor. Now, before I get into the details of the Golden Corridor, I just want to discuss some targeting criteria that's been used in Red Lake over the years, because it's analogous to what we're looking at on our side of the belt. First and foremost, a proximity to an unconformity. Shown in the red line there, an unconformity in this case is a crustal scale fault structure, and you want to be close enough that you're on the first and second order fault structures, second and third order even, and not right on the unconformity. So you want to be within about 1,000 meters of that unconformity on those parallel structures, and that's where 94% of the gold ounces that have come out of Red Lake, they've all come from within about 1,000 meters of that big crustal scale feature. Secondly, a favorable regional structural trend. Now, this west-northwest trend relates to the D2 deformational event that is associated with the vast majority of gold mineralization in the belt. You see it's known as the mine trend in Red Lake, and it happens to align with Great Bear Resources LP zone. And that west-northwest trend is really quite important. So that's another thing to be looking for. Conversate Contrast. Now, this is really ubiquitous in all Ontario gold systems, orogenic gold systems. The idea here, two different rock types of different competencies juxtaposed against each other, and as greenstone belts are getting squeezed, one unit is bending and folding while the other is breaking open and forming vein systems. You see this at the LP zone between the felsic volcanics up against mafic volcanics, whereby the felsic volcanics, the more brittle of the two, is hosting the vast majority of mineralization. And you see this at the Red Lake Mine high-grade zone, whereby you have ultramafic volcanics up against mafic volcanics. And in that case, the mafic volcanics are the more brittle host, and they host the vast majority of the gold and the vein systems. As far as geophysical expressions, when you're targeting these things, you'd like to see magnetic lows and resistivity highs, ideally manifesting as lineaments. Magnetic lows relate to the magnetite destruction that is associated with carbonate alteration that envelops these gold deposits, and the resistivity highs can be indicative of silica alteration and quartz veining. So those are a couple of the things you want to be looking for, and these are all common criteria that have been implemented in the Red Lake District for decades. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. Fortunately for Prosper Gold and its shareholders, we see all of these aspects at the Golden Corridor. Proximity to the unconformity, that's really what drew our attention to the project. The favorable west-northwest structural trend, we see that along this segment of that crustal scale feature. Conversate Contrast, in this case, we have mafic volcanics squeezed in between ultramafics and gabbros, and we see resistivity high and magnetic low lineaments that are coinciding. And this was really the exploration concept we had in mind when we took on the project. And after the till sampling results last year, this is all now underpinned and anchored by a pretty significant pristine gold grain and till anomaly. We term this area now the Golden Corridor, and there's a lot of potential, a lot of exploration potential in this part of the project. A 5+ kilometer prospective corridor based on the geophysical expressions and the geological characteristics, and now anchored by this 3,300 meter by 500 meter till anomaly that remains open for expansion. Another thing I want to point our viewers to is you can see there's a flexure or a bend in that fault system in this part of the property. And that can be further conducive to some dilation, which can allow fluid migration and fluid flow. And this is something that plays an integral role at the Dixie project, at the LP zone specifically. I just want to speak a bit to the significance of the till sampling results that we got in the end of 2020. So the 3,300 meter by 500 meter till anomaly remains open for expansion. It is open to the northwest along that trend and open to the east towards that other anomaly known as the E12 anomaly, which is about 3.5 kilometers to the east there. One very impressive sample we got at the easternmost extent of our sampling grid, sample UC13. In one 10 kilogram sample, we came up with 882 gold grains. Some of the sizes of these grains are quite large, resulting in a concentration of about 110 grams per ton gold. And 100% of these grains are pristine in nature. I'll talk about the importance of that on the next slide. The implications, generally speaking, with the till anomaly we've come up with: one, the size of the till anomaly and the pristine nature of the grains suggests there's strong potential for a sizable deposit in the nearby vicinity. Secondly, the size and abundance of the gold grains themselves suggests there's a strong potential for a high-grade vein-type source, which is of course what we're hoping to find in this case. And further, gold mineralization is near surface, and you can kind of come up with that conclusion based on the fact that these gold grains are derived from the bedrock till interface. So you can glean a lot of information from those till results if you're fortunate enough to have some positive results, which we did last year. The pristine nature of the grains is an indication of transport distance. So a gentleman named Stu Averill, who wrote the book on till sampling, at least in Canada anyway, over about since the 80s, over decades, he's done a number of case studies on existing deposits and over the course of the exploration stages. And he's come up with a bit of a formula based on the morphology of the gold grains it gives you an idea of how far from the source that these grains have been moved. So for example, if they're rounded grains and all the sharp edges have been reshaped, you could be anywhere from 1 kilometer to over 10 kilometers away from the source. On the other end of the spectrum, the pristine grains with their jagged edges and if you have crystal faces preserved, like those grains in the photographs on your right, that tells you you're within 100 or 200 meters of the source. So not only do we feel we're onto something big, potentially high grade, we know we're close, and that's really important. So Stu Averill, he's given us a bit of a third-party validation, having looked at the data. He's excited, and of course we're excited, and so it's good to have, from such a good resource, have that third-party validation. As far as our 2021 exploration plans, we currently have IP crews on the ground that are going to complete that survey shown in the image on the right there. And that we'll have all the data for that prior to drilling. Drilling is scheduled to commence May 15th with 10,000 meters proposed, and that's really phase one. If things go well, we'll be ramping up in a hurry. And there are a couple of other targets that warrant a few drill holes, but really the main focus at this point is the Golden Corridor. We are going to do some more till sampling as well, kind of two different aspects: infill till sampling around the Golden Corridor, trying to fill in that space towards the E12 anomaly as well as up to the northwest. And we will be doing some property-wide reconnaissance till sampling as well, based on the identification of a number of these favorably oriented large-scale structural features we're seeing. So hopefully we can come up with some more targets just like the Golden Corridor. So in a little over a year, that the property has moved forward in a significant way. What this means is that beginning in around the end of April, we should have some exciting and steady news flow, hopefully carrying through 2021 and beyond. And certainly management's very excited to get this program going. It will be the inaugural drilling program at the Golden Corridor, and we'll be mobilizing late April to get camp going and get ready to receive the drill crews. If you want to talk further, either with myself or with Peter Bernier, Pete's email is pete@prospergoldcorp.com. You can reach me, Rory, that's RORY, at prospergoldcorp.com directly if you'd like as well. So thank you kindly for your time. I'm just going to go through the questions here, and I'll try and answer some of these questions. So first off, can you please touch base on the other deposits that have been discovered with pristine till trains? Yeah, I can. There's a deposit called the Rainy River deposit. It is south of Red Lake. Perhaps I'm going to take a bit of a guess, but it's probably about 150 kilometers southeast of Red Lake, and that is now owned by New Gold. That's now a producing mine. So that really the best part of that deposit, the thing that kind of put the project over the edge and made it economically viable, was discovered through till sampling and subsequent drill testing. I'll just look at a few others here. Has Stu Averill provided a comp of the of the UC Gold Grain dispersal train versus other in Canada? Yes, he did. In that slide, let me go to that slide there. At least to some degree. In his quote here, it actually kind of right out of the gate. So this is Stu Averill's quote. The UC Gold Grain dispersal train closely matches known trains glacially down ice of large, well-mineralized gold structures. He goes on to say, the fact that every sample within the 1 by 3 kilometer limits of the train is anomalous attests to Prosper's diligence in ensuring that only high-quality samples were collected. The dispersal train is still open to the northwest and thus is probably more than 1 kilometer wide. Its width actually understates its scale and potential importance because the very oblique orientation of the train relative to the targeted structural unconformity implies that the mineralized segment of this unconformity is at least 2 kilometers rather than 1 kilometer long. And he also goes on to say the unusually large size of the pristine gold grains in sample UC13 near the head of the train further suggests that some of this mineralization is of the high grain vein type. So subjectively, he has made comparisons to this and other till trains in Canada. But funny enough, we tried going through literature. We wanted to kind of do a comparison, a direct comparison ourselves, apples to apples. But most of the trains are either rounded or modified grains. It's actually quite rare to have a pristine gold grain anomaly. That is of this size. And that probably has to do with the oblique nature, as he mentioned, of that large mineralized segment or potentially mineralized segment. Okay, let's go on here. Is Great Bear targeting a similar style of mineralization to the north of you? That's a good question. We're not actually sure what they're targeting up there. We know they're targeting on a similar kind of concept where the trend up there is that west-northwest trend. That's favorable for dilation. But we're not exactly sure what style of mineralization. I'm assuming it's probably related to an LP style of mineralization, which is really just, again, it's a second and third order fault structure right alongside a large regional unconformity. And there is a pretty significant regional structure up there known as the Swain Lake Deformation Belt. So it could relate to that, but I'm not exactly sure here. Okay, let's move on here. Just looking at some more questions. Oh, just answered. When would you expect to get the results back from your mid-May drilling? That's another good question. Yeah, labs are pretty busy these days. We're kind of signed up with a lab who promises relatively quick turnaround times. But in these markets where it's essentially the labs are overwhelmed with samples, you kind of have to assume that those results might take 4 or 5 weeks. it also depends on the time of year and the kind of peak times for the labs. So if we assume 4 to 5 weeks and we start drilling at mid-May, we're looking at drill results either mid-June or perhaps late June. Okay, I'm going to go on to some more questions here. What does access to the property look like, and will there be helicopters involved? Thankfully, for my sake, there will not be helicopters involved, because that is a quick and easy way to blow up a budget. The access on this project is fantastic. There's a whole bunch of logging roads all over the place, tens and tens, probably hundreds of kilometers of logging roads in the network on the property. They're actually in there logging as we speak in a new area. So luckily for me and for the company, it's all road access, skid-based drilling. So it should be pretty cost effective. Another question, is it possible to sample pristine grains from a source that is not nearby? That's a good question. It is possible that your pristine grains have come from a further source. That can happen when you have what's called, or what's referred to as, sulfide encapsulation of gold grains. So if you have a gold grain surrounded by pyrite, it can in theory be scraped from the rock, transported a significant distance, dropped, and then subsequently oxidized so that the pyrite disappears or is oxidized, weathered away, and you're left with an intact, pristine gold grain. We did think about that, and speaking with the lab that processed all our samples and looking at all the results, based on the fact that there were little to zero sulfide grains in the vast majority of the samples, we can say with a fair degree of confidence that this isn't a case of sulfide encapsulation. That more likely this is native gold being taken from vein systems and transported along. Another question, what's the drill plan look like for the upcoming program? Will you be focusing the initial drilling around the pristine grain sample? Absolutely. I should hire this person. We will be focusing on the Golden Corridor right out of the gate. The vast majority of drilling is going to be starting, just a tiny bit up ice, maybe 50 to 100 meters up ice of that exceptional UC13 sample that has 100% pristine grains, because we know we're close, very close with that sample, and we know that we see some coarse grains. So really that's a logical place to start, and we will kind of step out from there. And if I go back to another slide here, you can see we have two of these prospective lineaments drawn in. One is completely covered. The one on the north is completely covered by a swamp. And the one on the south, you get a tiny bit, maybe 4 or 5% exposure, pokes out here and there. So we'll be testing both of those lineaments, as well as in between those lineaments, because commonly when you have two big fault systems, in between those faults is where you're getting a lot of veins developing as well. Okay, let's go to another question here. How many holes are planned and the average depth? For the phase 1 program, we're going to more or less be drilling 300-meter holes. The idea being that, we know that at least in part the mineralization is near surface, so there's no need to go to do expensive deep drilling at this point. It's more, ideally you hit the vein system and you step out laterally. So that 10,000 meters, if we assume 300-meter holes, we're starting with about 35 holes. And then, as mentioned, as soon as we have some joy, we'll be ramping up to somewhere along the lines of 40 or 50,000 meters for a phase 2 program. And the permitting process in Ontario is quite favorable. The local stakeholders are great to work with, so we can turn around permits pretty well, or pretty quickly rather. If you do hit mineralization at the Golden Corridor, are you expecting similar style as the Great Bear deposit? That's a good question. Looking at the geology, so the fact that Great Bear's LP zone is hosted in rhyolites or felsic volcanics, and maybe for some other factors I'm not too sure, but it's kind of a unique style of mineralization they have there. There's not a lot of actual quartz veining. It seems to be kind of, maybe more silicification in these rhyolites and these deformation zones. Whereas I expect something more along the lines of hopefully forward looking, obviously here, more similar to what you see at the Red Lake Gold Mine, which is, quartz veins. There's also replacement zones around these veins, but really, the high grade chutes you see in proper quartz veins, and these are pretty extensive systems. And that's largely the fact that we're in similar rocks. We see ultramafics and mafic volcanics. So the host rock can kind of dictate the physiology of the mineralization, if you will. So at this point, it's hard to say, but I would say we're hoping for something more similar to the Red Lake Gold Mine as opposed to the LP zone at Great Bear. Okay, any other questions here? I may have answered them all. Let's just see. I'm going to the top here. Okay, what is it going to take to really prove out these properties to the effect that they have what you believe they have? That's a good question. Yeah, so you should always have predetermined decision points in place before you move into a project. Gold in Ontario, it is drilling intensive in the fact, really, you get these vein systems, and you could be hitting a quartz vein or a series of quartz veins or a silicified zone or whatever it may be. But it's not necessarily, homogeneously dispersed throughout that vein system. You're really targeting a lot of the times these ore chutes. These ore chutes, they could be, 5-10 meters in diameter, or whatever the case, and these things are within those veins. So really what I'm getting at is it takes a fair amount of drilling to really hit these things. But once you start hitting the ore chutes, it's actually fairly straightforward to target those things down plunge, and they can go for kilometers. So it's going to take a fair amount of drilling. 10,000 meters on the Golden Corridor just to see what's there is actually quite reasonable. If you've worked in this neck of the woods before, it's not overkill. But of course, you might get lucky in the first hole or two, and at that point, your decision is made for you. Apart from that, management feels very confident in this target, all things considered. But there are some other targets on the project that, in their own right, are essentially standalone exploration targets. The Skinner North, that's a 2 kilometer by 1 kilometer zone of a whole bunch of these axial planar faults that could result in something significant. But and then the other till sampling should hopefully lead us into some other targets as well. So 10,000 meters and a property scale till sampling program, you should have a pretty good idea after that. Whether it's what you have on your hands, essentially. Okay, I'll go to the next question here. Okay, this question. So one of the betters in Canada, right? I'm assuming that refers to the gold grain dispersal train. And again, comparing apples to apples, this is a pristine gold grain anomaly. We haven't actually come across a pristine gold grain anomaly this size. It's usually, gets rounded or sub-rounded in a hurry. So long story short, I would say yes, it's up there as far as one of the more impressive, certainly pristine gold grain till anomalies in Canada, for sure. And some of those samples, that one sample, 882 grains, and the size of those grains, truly exceptional. We've had a hard time going through the literature and finding samples like that. They do exist. There's a couple up in Nunavut, but it's a different style of mineralization up there. What are the projected all-in drill costs? About $200 a meter all in, but that actually includes some of our till sampling and things like that. So, drill prices have come up a touch, but still very cost-effective in Ontario, especially if there's no helicopters involved. So, you're kind of planning for 160, 175 all-in costs per meter. Has there been any previous drilling in this area? That's a good question. There's been one historical drill hole close, not really within our anomaly, and this was actually drilled through the unconformity itself, not so much targeting not so much targeting the lineaments that we're targeting. So I would argue that it's A, it's to the west, and B, it's probably a little far south. But they did get some anomalous gold. They did hit 6 or 8 meters of quartz veining. There's a lot of alteration. Talking to the historical operator is pretty impressive. So if anything, it encourages us. Okay, and that's good timing. I've answered all of the questions. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the audience taking the time today, and please follow our story. Thanks. Bye now.